Have you ever wondered what foods are best for emergency storage? Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time joining us, or even if you've been watching for a while and just never bothered to hit that subscribe button, we would love it if you would subscribe and ring the little bell for notifications. That way you don't miss any of our upcoming content. Today, I'm going to get back to basics. I'm going to do a back to basics look at emergency food storage. Lately, I hear a lot of people saying, I'm just getting started with food storage, or I'm just realizing I need to get started with food storage. What should I store? For people who are just getting started, it can be a little daunting, but we keep getting slapped in the face with reasons why we need to have emergency food storage. And with the really concerning things that we see looming ahead, your food storage is more important than ever. It could be the thing that keeps you alive when there's not enough food to go around. So there's three main things we need to think about when we're talking about food storage. The first, of course, is shelf life. And then the next consideration is nutrition. Our food storage will keep us alive, but it should do more than just keep us alive. It should keep us healthy and keep us from suffering any kind of nutritional deficiencies. And then the third consideration with our food storage is going to be preparation. What does it need to prepare this food? How much fuel is it going to take? Does it need water? How much water does it take? Those are all important considerations when those things could be in short supply. So what I've done here is I've divided things up into categories. I've got first dry goods, and then we've got our canned goods, and then we've got our staples, then we've got fats and seasonings, and then finally we've got freeze-dried foods. Now these are just the basics. If you watch my hauls, you know I can get pretty wild and crazy with my food storage, and I add in some pretty creative things. But if you're just getting started, you want to start with the basics. And I'm going to go over all these items, some of the pros and cons of the different items that we have here. So there's three other ways that you'll also hear me categorize these foods. There's short-term storage items, and these are items that can be stored on the shelf for usually about 6 months to a year. Then there's medium-term storage items. These are items that are going to be good for about 3 to 5 years. And finally, we've got our long-term storage items. These items can be stored for 20 to 30 years or even longer. So first, we've got our old prepper standby of beans and rice. Now, there's good reasons why these are so popular for food storage. The first reason is their shelf life. If these are packaged properly in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, these will last a good 20 to 30 years at least. Another reason is nutrition. These provide a lot of calories, especially when you compare it to the cost that you paid for them. They also form a complete protein when consumed together. And they're very inexpensive to stock up on. Both of these bags this is a 20-pound bag of white rice, and this is an 8-pound bag of pinto beans. Together, these both cost under $20. And this has over 200 servings of rice. This has over 100 servings of beans. So for a family of 4 eating the rice once a week, this bag would last a year. And for a family of 4 eating beans once a week, this would last 6 months. Now, I really like rice. I think that rice is a really good meal stretcher. You can add it into a lot of things or serve a lot of things over it and stretch the meal further to get more nutrition and fill more bellies. Now, it's important to note that white rice will store a lot longer than brown rice. Yes, brown rice is a little bit more nutritious, but it has more oils in it, and so it'll go rancid a lot more quickly. This doesn't mean you can't store brown rice. This just means that you need to store less of it and store it for a shorter amount of time. Rotate it out more quickly. One of the downsides to storing dried beans is that they take quite a while to cook. Typically, you would soak them overnight and then boil them quite a while. If you use your Instant Pot, they'll cook a lot more quickly. There's a good chance you won't have an Instant Pot in an emergency, but you can get a regular pressure cooker that you can use on a stovetop or an emergency burner or even a wood fire. But for that reason, I also like to store some instant beans. Instant beans are beans that have already been cooked and then dehydrated, so they cook really quickly. You can simmer these in only about 5 minutes, or you could just pour boiling water over them and let them sit, and you'd have beans. Now this is another option that I like to have on hand. These are dried lentils. Lentils have at least as much nutrition as beans, maybe more, but they don't require the soaking, and they cook up a lot quicker than beans, so these are a really good item to have on hand. These are also very inexpensive and can store just the same amount of time as beans. Another dry good that's good to have on hand is oats. This is another cheap item that if you package it in Mylar with oxygen absorbers, it's going to last a very long time. And you want to have some options for breakfast. This can cook up pretty quickly. You can even just soak it overnight with milk or any kind of liquid, and you'll have a good hearty breakfast, and it is very nutritious. Another dry good that's very good to have on hand is pasta. We've got some spaghetti here, and I also have some elbow macaroni. I store all types of pasta, but if you're going to be just starting out with food storage, I would recommend these two types of pasta. They're very versatile and they store in the least amount of space. Now they do require water to cook, but they cook up more quickly than beans or rice. And there's all sorts of options to add to your pasta to make a different meal every time. You can store red sauce, and you can get your red sauce in these cans or a bottle like this. These cans will store a little bit more easily and they're less expensive. You can also use Alfredo sauce, cheese sauce, there's pesto sauce. There's no end of things that you can put on your pasta. And then the final item that I have in my dry goods is dry potato flakes. Now you can store potatoes in many different ways, but I like to keep the dry potato flakes on hand. I do keep a bunch of these packets because these only need water. They don't need any kind of milk, butter, anything like that. By the same token, I really like these potato pearls. They also have all the seasonings added. You just add boiling water and you've got mashed potatoes. And then of course you can also store mashed potato flakes that are just potato with no flavors, no butter, nothing added. Now you can buy those at the grocery store in a cardboard box, and if you do so, you're going to want to repackage them, once again in Mylar with oxygen absorbers. Or if you can find them already packaged in an airtight container with an oxygen absorber, then you won't have to do the work. These are in a can with an oxygen absorber, so these have a shelf life of 5 years. Of course, the downside is that you do have to add the seasonings to this type of potatoes. So next we're moving on to our canned goods. There's all sorts of items that you can get in cans. Now these canned goods are mostly in the medium shelf life range. They have a shelf life of about 2 to 5 years depending on what it is. The important thing to remember about shelf life is that things have an expiration date or a best by date, but you don't need to take that as a hard and fast rule. Almost anything will last well past its best by date. With things like canned goods, you just need to check out the can and make sure that the can is not bulging or leaking. And when you open it up, just give the contents a little sniff and just see if they smell normal, if they're past their shelf life. 9 out of 10 times, things are just fine for many years longer. You do want to be careful with high acid items such as tomatoes, things like pineapple that have acids and enzymes. Those can degrade the cans faster than things like meats and vegetables. Now I will say, if you get a can that's dented like this can of tomato soup is, make sure that you put that to the beginning of your rotation. Put that right to the front. Don't put it in the back of your supply, because the dent could compromise the can and you want to use that up more quickly. But up front here I have a whole lot of proteins, because protein is going to be very, very important in an emergency situation, and there's so many different options that you have for canned proteins. Things like this chicken and the tuna, these are easy to find and they're less expensive than a lot of the other ones. This luncheon meat, which is basically the generic version of Spam, that's also pretty easy to find and inexpensive. It's just over $2 even now. They also have these canned hams, which are pretty similar to the Spam, but they're a little bit bigger. You can get other fish in cans. These are kippers and sardines. We actually really like these. We take these hiking with us when we go hiking. But the fish have a lot of good nutrition. They have a lot of the healthy fats that your body needs. You can also get salmon in a can, of course. Now these Keystone meats are pretty popular. Right here I've got a can of pork and a can of turkey. Those have been the easiest for me to find, pork, turkey, and chicken since the pandemic. It's been a little bit harder to find the beef and the ground beef, but they do have those. These are really big cans, and they're really great if you can find them, but keep an eye out for the price on these. I've found them at Walmart and I've found them on Amazon, but your price point should be about $8 on one of these cans. You don't want to pay much more than that, because there are sellers who will buy them up and sell them at a much higher price, so watch out for that. There's plenty of other meats that are easy to find as well. This is a can of roast beef. These are a little bit more expensive. And then of course these Vienna sausage bites, or even just Vienna sausages, these are a very inexpensive canned meat that will give you some protein. Another thing that's good to have on hand are complete meals that are in a can. We've got beef stew, some SpaghettiOs, some chunky soup, a chicken a la king. These are just some examples of things that you could have. Now the reason that these are good to have is because you could actually open this can and eat this right out of the can without even heating it if you really had to. This is a complete meal and it's completely edible to eat straight out of the can. Or you could heat it just a little bit with, anything that you had, any type of emergency heat that you had. You could even heat it right in the can. Open the can, set that over a little can of, fancy heat or something, and you have a meal that you can easily eat without any preparation required. Next I have these Campbell soups, and I think of these more as a meal maker than an actual soup to eat. You can mix these with pastas and canned veggies and canned meats, and you can have a casserole or a goulash, a chop suey, something like that. It's important to make sure when you're storing foods that you can make meals out of what you're storing. And then, of course, we have all sorts of canned fruits and veggies that you can include. You should choose what your family likes. These are important to have for nutritional reasons, but choose the veggies and fruits that your family likes and eats and that you use in your cooking. Now, some of the pros and cons of the canned food. Well, the pros are that it's inexpensive and it's pretty easy to get. And it also, a lot of these foods will contain some water in them, like the canned vegetables, the canned fruits, some of the canned meats, and that water can be valuable. You can drink it. Meats and vegetables will have some salt in the water, which is a very important electrolyte that we're going to be lacking in an emergency. There's sugar in the juice in the canned fruits that can give you energy, or it can flavor your oatmeal. You can also use the juice from the veggies and the meats right in your dish as you're cooking. So those are some of the pros of the canned foods. And I would say some of the cons are that they're heavy if you need to move them around. They're not going to last as long as some of the other options. And there are some people who don't really like the texture of canned foods. Our family actually prefers a lot of vegetables canned, but some people don't. And a lot of people have an issue with the textures of canned meats. And then, of course, don't overlook home canning. Of course, if you're a home canner, it's great to have your home canned items. You can have vegetables, this is meat, and this is a complete meal right here. This is a sweet and sour chicken. So if you do can your own foods, by all means, that is absolutely wonderful, and that is a big part of your food storage. And if you have the canning supplies and the knowledge, that will be a huge help to you because you can use it to preserve your food in a time of emergency. So next we're moving on to staples, and one of the most important staples here is going to be milk. That's important for so many reasons, for the kids to drink, to cook with, to have for cereal, so many reasons you would need milk. For short-term storage, I like these shelf-stable cartons of milk. You can get these right at the Dollar Tree for $1.25 now, which is a really good price. These are just milk, and so they really taste pretty good if you refrigerate them first. We do use these sometimes just to rotate through our stock, and I also grab these out if we happen to be out of milk and we didn't realize it. And then for medium-term storage, these milk in cans are okay. These are better for cooking, I think, than for drinking, although you could mix this half and half with water and drink it. But this is Media Crema. This is my absolute favorite. If you watch my hauls, you see that I do stock a lot of this. This is a light cream in a can. This can be used in cooking. This could be used in your coffee. You can also do so much with this, like make butter, make sour cream. There's a lot you can do with this. And then for the longer term, you want to store powdered milk. And I don't mean the powdered milk from the grocery store in the baking aisle. That stuff is really pretty nasty most of the time. What you want to do is find a brand that your family likes and store what your family likes. These are the two that we prefer. We like the Thrive Life Instant Milk, which is a low-fat milk. And then we also like the Nestle Nido, which is a whole-fat milk, a whole milk. And so depending on what I'm using it for, especially if it's in recipes, I might make a decision based on if I want a whole milk or a fat-free milk. And then for some of our other staples, I do use powdered versions. We use powdered versions of eggs, and these are great. They mix up just like scrambled eggs. You wouldn't even know the difference. We have powdered butter. We have powdered sour cream. These are items that are pretty difficult to store in any other way, and so we love our powdered versions. So next we're moving on to some staples. Now, salt is a very important item to store. In fact, you're supposed to store it's almost 5 pounds of salt per person per year. That's a lot of salt. That's almost 3 of these containers for one person for 1 year. Now you want to make sure it's iodized salt because iodine that's added to the salt is a nutrient that our bodies really need. Now you have to remember you are going to get some salt from some of the other foods that you store, some of the canned goods especially. So you might have a little wiggle room on that, but salt is very important to store. We also have sugar, and then behind that is flour. Now those will store for quite a long time. You want to do the same thing with those. You want to seal them up in Mylar bags. You can use an oxygen absorber in the flour, but not in the sugar because it will turn it rock hard, but it really does not need it as long as it's stored airtight. And if it does harden over time, you can crunch it up, or you can even put it in the oven at a low temperature to soften it up. And then besides storing sugar, honey is a really great item to store. Actually, honey is one of the forever foods. It's a food that can be kept forever. It will never go bad. The best honey to store would be raw local honey because that's the best honey to use at any time. But any honey can be stored forever, and it can be used to sweeten foods. It can be used for a lot of things. It's got antibacterial properties. It can also be used on wounds. It can be used for coughs and sore throats. This is what I give my kids usually when they have a cough, is a spoonful of honey. Now, pancake mix is another good item to store. This is a just add water pancake mix. As long as it's a just add water, it's a really good thing to have for breakfast. It's inexpensive. It's not going to store as long as like the flour and the sugar because it does have other added ingredients in it. It probably has some fats added to it, and it probably has some leavening ingredients, and those things would go bad more quickly. But you could seal this up in Mylar with an oxygen absorber and at least get a few years out of it. And it's a good, easy, filling breakfast. You want to make sure that you have some breakfast foods included in your storage. Now for real, true long-term storage, flour is probably a medium-term storage item, although I think there's a lot of people who have stored it for longer that will say that it's been fine. But if you want true long-term storage, you want to store whole wheat berries. And then, of course, to use them for flour, you would need to have a grinder to grind them. But this is a long-term storage item. This can be stored for 20 to 30 years if it remains sealed airtight. And it's actually pretty healthy to use the whole wheat berries because with wheat, as soon as it's ground into flour, within 2 to 3 days, it's lost so much of its nutrition. So this is actually better for you anyway. So if you're going to store wheat, you might want to get a grinder and sort of practice using it because it's better for you, and then you'll be accustomed to working with it if you ever have to work with it. And the good thing about storing things like flour and wheat and sugar is you'll be able to make things that you may not be able to buy and things that you can't store for long term. Things like bread, things like crackers. Of course, if you're going to make bread, you're going to want to store some yeast. Now, this is a little bit more touchy. It really stores for a very long time if it's in the freezer. But in an emergency, you may not have a freezer or cold storage, but just keep it as cool as you can keep it. You can buy packets or you can buy a large container like this. And I do store those in my freezer. So the next category here is going to be fats and oils and seasonings. Now, fats and oils are going to be important for nutrition. They're also going to be important for calories and for making your food more palatable. Now, I do store oils like this because I do use these regularly, so they get rotated. And these can be stored for 1 to 2 years, probably at least. So they're a medium-term storage item. Coconut oil stores a little bit longer. What you really want to store, and I don't have it right here in front of me, is ghee, because ghee can last a very long time. It's basically a clarified butter that you can get in a can, like a jar at the store, or you can make it yourself. And then seasonings. You'd want to use what your family likes. This is just an example. I store a ton of seasonings. Tons. I love seasonings, but this is an all-purpose seasoning, so you want to start with something all-purpose so that you can use it on a lot of things and build from there. Just add to your seasonings. You probably already have a lot of seasonings in your home, but just make sure that you're storing plenty of seasonings to use so you don't get food fatigue by always eating the same foods with no flavor. And then, of course, bouillons and broths are important to store. You can store a lot more in a lot less space if you use bouillon. This is a powdered bouillon. I have all sorts of bouillons, chicken, beef, veggie. This is just an example. But store bouillons or broth or both. You can cook your rice in it. You can add this to so many things. And then the final thing that we're talking about today is our freeze-dried food. Of course, you can't talk about food storage without talking about freeze-dried foods. Now, freeze-dried foods are really the gold standard for food storage. And there's several reasons for that. Number one is the shelf life. These have a shelf life of 25 years when they're sealed in their cans, but they also are good for a year once they're opened, which can be important if you don't have refrigeration. These are good for a year without refrigeration once they're opened. Another of the big pros of freeze-dried food is the nutrition. Freeze-drying actually maintains at least 97% of the nutrition of the food, and that's especially important with the fruits and vegetables because there's no other method of food preservation that retains as many nutrients as freeze-drying does. The heat that's involved in canning and dehydrating and so many other methods of food preservation destroys some of the nutrients. Even the fruits and vegetables that you buy at the grocery store have been traveling so long and sitting in warehouses, they've already lost a lot of their nutrition. So literally the only way to get fruits and vegetables that are as nutritious as the freeze-dried is to literally grow them yourself and pick them when they're perfectly ripe and eat them right there. So that's another big pro of the freeze-dried food. And another plus to freeze-dried food is that you can store items that you really can't store any other way. You're not going to get bananas in a can. This is shredded cheese. You're not going to have many other ways to store that. Broccoli, you can't really get canned broccoli. This is yogurt, so that's another item that would be very difficult to store. These are yogurt drops, yogurt bites, but they've got meats and all sorts of different veggies, asparagus. I can tell you, you can get canned asparagus, but anything freeze-dried is going to be a million times tastier and much closer to what you're used to fresh than a canned item. And then, of course, the meats is another item that a lot of people don't care for canned. The texture is so much different. So a lot of people really prefer the freeze-dried meat. Another plus to the freeze-dried foods, besides the shelf life and the nutrition, is the fact that they're extremely light. They are perfect for putting together meals for your bug out bag. You can use them for backpacking meals. People who live in RVs or spend a lot of time in RVs really like them. So they're great for that reason. One of the biggest cons of freeze-dried food is that it's a little more expensive than some other foods. It's not actually that bad if you compare how much you're getting. Number one, like these are all gallon-sized cans, so you're getting a ton of food. There's no waste in them because you don't have any of the peels, the cores, the fat, gristle, bones, anything with the meat. That's all out of there. You're only getting the edible portions of the food. Another thing to remember when it comes to cost is that certain foods are going to cost more than others no matter what form you're buying them in. For example, people will look at the cans of meat and say, oh my goodness, this stuff is so expensive. Well, meat is going to be more expensive no matter how you buy it. This can of meat at the grocery store is going to cost a lot more than this can of peas. Fresh meat is going to cost more than the fresh vegetables in the produce section. And certain vegetables and fruits are going to be more expensive than others. If you look at these fruits, look at the cans of corn and the cans of peas and the bananas and things like that, and those are pretty inexpensive compared to some of the other foods. Obviously, cheeses and meats are more. Things like broccoli are going to cost a little bit more. That's just the way it is when you buy food. Certain foods have a higher cost than others. But of course, there are trade-offs in life. So to get the superior nutrition and the superior shelf life, I don't mind paying a little bit more. So one thing that you'll notice is glaringly absent from this food storage plan is fresh foods. Obviously, that's just the nature of food storage. You can't include fresh foods in your long-term storage plan. But what you can include are garden seeds. Store some heirloom garden seeds. That way you can save the seeds from the foods that you grow year after year after year. Whether or not you think you can grow a garden, almost anyone can grow sprouts and microgreens. Sprouting and growing microgreens can be done under the direst of circumstances in just a matter of days. So get yourself some sprouting seeds, some microgreen seeds, and the little bit of equipment that's necessary to do those things, and learn how to do it now. Because I can guarantee you, in a time of emergency, if you're living off your food storage, that little bit of fresh crunch would mean the world to you. I hope you got something out of this video. Whether you're just starting your food storage or you've been at it a while, I hope you found some useful tidbits. I will say the most important thing to remember when you're starting your food storage is to live by the rule, store what you eat and eat what you store. You want to be storing foods that you know your family will eat and enjoy, foods that you know how to prepare, and foods that no one's going to have an adverse reaction to. That being said, though, I do think if there's something that you're not accustomed to eating or cooking with, but you see the value of it in your food storage, it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of research and look up some recipes and learn how to use that food. For example, I never used to cook with dried beans very often. I usually used canned beans, but once I learned all the benefits to having beans in your food storage, dried beans, I started to incorporate that into my cooking a little bit more. I had family members who didn't really enjoy lentils, but I really think they're a great thing for food storage, so I started looking for some different recipes that I could make and help them to learn how to like lentils. And the same goes with the wheat berries. Once I learned all the benefits of storing the wheat berries, I decided I better learn how to use them. One thing I like to recommend to people when they're just starting out with their food storage is to sit down and make some menus of meals that can be made with completely shelf-stable ingredients. And then set up a menu for, say, the first 72 hours, then set up a menu for a week, and then build from there. Repeat the process over and over. You can either create new menus for each week, or you can just copy the same menu over and over again. Build your food storage little by little, week by week. That way you know you're not just storing food, but you're storing food that you can use to make complete meals that your family will enjoy. If you need some ideas for this kind of meals, I have a couple of videos that I've done that I'll link down in the description box if you want to check those out. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a bowl of rice emoji down in the comments so I know you watched the whole thing. It means the world to me when you watch the whole video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.